Our hearing. So good morning again, and welcome to everyone. We appreciate, and we're all going to learn together. So the purpose of this workshop is really accountability and transparency are two words that we all talk a lot about. We all try always, I think, to have continuous process improvement, being committed to mobility for our entire state. So with that, I just want to welcome everybody. I'm going to assume that everybody knows everybody, but I'll ask our panel there maybe just a little brief intro and tell us something we wouldn't otherwise know about you, like you used to, drive race cars or whatever. So with that, welcome. And Susan, I'm going to pass it to you.
Well, would we like to have each of the panelists introduce yourselves now, or do you want to wait? Yeah, now would be good.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you and good morning. My name is Tim Gubbins. I'm Caltrans District Director of District 5, which is the Central Coast.
Good morning. I'm Lori Berman. I'm the Interim Chief Deputy Director, but my day job is District Director in District 11, San Diego and Imperial Counties.
Good morning, Bijan Sartipi, District Director for District 4, Bay Area.
John Belinsky, District Director for District 8, which is the Inland Empire, Riverside, and San Bernardino counties.
Stephen Mallory, your chauffeur-in-chief.
Jim Davis, I'm the Capital Outlay Support Program Manager.
Mike Keever, Division Chief for Engineering Services, which includes bridge design and bridge construction.
Janice Benton in Caltrans Headquarters Division of Design.
Bruce DeTura, Caltrans Programming Division Chief.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioners and Caltrans executives, I wanted to just take a moment to talk a little bit about the commission roles and responsibilities in program delivery. And it's really just really for all of us to remind ourselves of what the requirements are in statute. So as we know, Senate Bill 1 established new transportation programs and augmented existing programs. Along with the augmentation of funds, Sb1 significantly increased the Commission's roles and responsibility for oversight in program delivery across all of its programs. The Commission is charged with ensuring transparency and accountability of taxpayer dollars that are used to improve the state's transportation system. And the Commission's accountability responsibility for the investment of transportation funds under its purview, including Senate Bill 1 program funds, includes adopting guidelines that require increased assurance that the promises made by the recipients of funding at the time the decision is made to invest are kept. The Commission does adopt guidelines with provisions to increase assurance that recipients of transportation funds understand that at the front end they are expected to prepare and submit the most accurate estimates possible for the cost, schedule, scope, and benefits of a project at the time that funding is requested, and that recipients are accountable to carry out the delivery of the projects consistent with the front end to commitments and maintain a system of record keeping and internal control throughout the project delivery process to ensure the accurate and timely reporting of the actual cost, schedule, and benefits of the project, including issuance of transparent and plain language reports that are easily understood by the public. Legislation unique to the shop, I wanted to take a minute because Sb1 really did expand the requirements for the shop. So did a prior bill, Senate Bill 486. So legislation unique to the shop expands the Commission's oversight responsibilities. Specifically, Caltrans must prepare in consultation with the Commission a robust asset management plan to guide the selection of projects for the shop. In connection with the asset management plan, the Commission must adopt targets and performance measures reflecting state transportation goals and objectives, and review and approve the asset management plan, including the final version of the first phase and the complete plan prepared by the department to inform the 2020 shop. Caltrans must incorporate the performance targets of Sb1 and other targets adopted by the Commission into the asset management plan for approval by the Commission, And as you're aware from our meeting yesterday, Commission staff is working with Caltrans to ensure the asset management plan brought forward in March includes targets for each asset class included in Sb1. Those are the 4 asset classes, to measure the degree to which progress is made towards achieving the overall 2027 targets and the targets adopted by the Commission. So the Commission is required to review the proposed SHOP relative to its overall adequacy, consistency with the asset management plan, and funding priorities established in the Streets and Highways Code, the level of annual funding needed to implement the program, and the impact of those expenditures on the State Transportation Improvement Program. The Commission may decline to adopt the SHOP if it determines that the program is not consistent with the asset management plan. And Caltrans must annually report to the Commission relative to the SHOP expenditures and the progress made and achievement of the performance goals specified in Sb1 and the Commission's adopted targets. And annually, the Commission must now evaluate Caltrans' effectiveness in reducing deferred maintenance and improving road conditions on the state highway system, as demonstrated by the progress made by the goals set forth in Senate Bill 1. The Commission may make recommendations for improvement and may withhold future project allocations if it determines that program funds are not being appropriately spent. The Commission must annually include any findings in its annual report to the Legislature. To provide sufficient and transparent oversight of Caltrans' capital outlay resources composed of both state staff and contractors, the Commission must now allocate Caltrans capital outlay support resources by project phase, including pre-construction. Through this action, the Commission is now expected to provide public transparency for Caltrans' budget estimates, increasing assurance that the annual budget forecast is reasonable. For projects that experience increases in capital or support costs above the amounts in the Commission's initial allocation, the Commission has established a threshold for requiring a supplemental project allocation. The Commission's adopted guidelines also establish the threshold that the Commission determined necessary to ensure efficiency and is allowed to provide exceptions as necessary so that projects are not unnecessarily delayed. These thresholds will be described by Stephen Mahler. Caltrans must, for each project requiring a supplemental project allocation, submit a request for approval to the Commission. And as you know, in June 2017, the Commission adopted interim guidelines for the SHOP and guidelines for the asset management plan to ensure the provisions in law that I just shared with you are complied with. These guidelines were developed through an open and public process in consultation with Caltrans. They do include transparency and accountability requirements for the front-end in-progress and follow-up accountability, and requiring compliance with all applicable provisions of law. So this workshop today is intended to begin a robust discussion of Caltrans' program management process, the new role of the Commission in the process, and Commission delegations to Caltrans that allow Caltrans to manage risks involved in the delivery of the programs, management of the projects, and ensure compliance with state and federal requirements through a system of internal controls that ensure accountability and transparency. And with that, Commissioners, I really, in my remarks, focused on the SHOP. This program delivery workshop will cover the STIP and other programs as well, but I just felt like it's, given the increased responsibility with respect to the SHOP, it was important to just remind us all as we embark on this discussion of what the statutory responsibilities are. So with that, I'll turn it back to the Chair.
Thank you, Susan. So now I think we're going to call on Malcolm to give us kind of an overview of the program delivery.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to keep my comments pretty high level, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity to have this in-depth conversation about project delivery and risk management and accountability across the board in delivering the program. I appreciate the opportunity to have a cross-section of our staff here to talk about those, have those conversations, because there's different levels of accountability at different levels in the organization, from the district directors to the chief engineer. And they're going to get into a lot of detailed information, and I'll defer getting too deep into that until the presentation. But what I really look at for the program and what I concentrate on is the staff in front of you representing the rest of the organization, we're working on 2,500 projects right now. Some of those projects in environmental, some of them in design, some of them in construction. Very high on my radar is the 750 plus contracts or projects that are in construction. And I certainly am very interested in those projects being managed from a scope, schedule, and quality standpoint on all the different components and all the different flavors of money on all those different projects. We know what our to-do list is for this year. I enter into contracts for delivery with each of the district directors. They know all the projects they have to deliver for environmental clearance, for ready to go to construction and advertise, RTL, as well as what they're managing in construction and closing out in construction. That's clear. We publish that. We agree on that at the beginning of the year. We talk about what risks are associated with those projects going in. My highest priority, pre-SB1 and now in the new SB1 era, is to deliver infrastructure improvements to the traveling public as quickly as we possibly can so it benefits the economy and the quality of life of the people of California. I'm not absent of individual project component budgets. I'm not absent of individual construction costs and those things. We're managing them at the PM level, at the district level, and then programmatically at headquarters in the program level. But my highest priority is to get those improvements out to the people of California as efficiently as we possibly can. And I look at that whole portfolio of 2,500 projects. This year, we're delivering 282 projects worth $2.4 billion ready to list for construction. And if history tells me anything over the last decade, we deliver somewhere between 98 and 100% of those projects each and every year. We are now at a higher level of expectation in monitoring not only the support and construction budgets on those projects, but all of the initial components. That's not a bad thing, that's a good thing. But the overarching interest on my part is to get those projects out as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So I think this is an opportunity for us to share a greater level of detail of information. I also am looking forward to the feedback and the robust conversation that we will have. And let me just give you a little bit of an overview of who I look to as far as accountability for the different projects as we assign them out there. Like I said, I sign agreements with each of the district directors. If I feel like there's a problem with a project or a problem with multiple projects in one area, the first conversation I have is with that district director. I've signed contracts with them. But they also have individual project managers monitoring the cost, scope, and schedule, and each of the tasks, whether it's a design manager, environmental manager, construction manager, they all have their own individual tasks, but those are being handled by the district directors. My agreement is with the district directors, and I'm expecting them to manage their portion of the portfolio. When it comes to the entire program, I go to my chief engineer and I go to Jim Davis as the project management division chief, and I want them to monitor the progress throughout the year, quarter by quarter, month by month. We know what milestones we have due. Those are the people that I go to make sure that we're monitoring the portfolio of projects in all the different phases. 2,500 projects. Am I worried that one project may cost $11 instead of $10? I am. But I'm counting on the district directors, the project managers, and Jim Davis to monitor that. What I want to do is make sure I deliver 282 projects worth $2.4 billion to the people of California to improve the transportation system. That's what I've committed to do. And predominantly we do that at about a 98% tick. And when it comes to cost, you'll see today, we come back to you on less than 3% of the projects to make adjustments. So 90%, 97% of the time, we're getting a hit. So just that's from a high level, I wanted to talk about that. Now, my entire 25-year career with Caltrans in one way or another has been involved in project delivery. From a staff engineer signing plans, to a supervisor, to a project manager, to a single focal point, to a district director, to the chief engineer, to the director. So every line of accountability that I described to you, I've had that position. So my whole career has been spent doing project delivery. The people in front of you have spent their career doing project delivery, and I look forward to sharing some of that level of specificity we get into in monitoring the program and individual projects. And I also very much look forward to your feedback and your reaction so that we can fold that in and determine going forward how we get better at what we do. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the commissioners of Malcolm? Thank you very much. And I also just want to add a little bit in terms of Malcolm just finished his term, I think, as chair of TRB. And I'm always fascinated when I go there every year and learn so much and then come home and quickly forget it and get into the next agenda and stuff. But I think also, I mean, you all have, I was trying to add up and say how many years we have of transportation experience. But I think it's also an opportunity to see if there's some other tweak we can make to make it better, because if we all have this same goal, you know, I would be real interested too, given the responsibility we have to report to the legislature. If there's something that's in statute that we can't do something, let's talk about it and flesh out what would make everybody's job getting across the goal line easier. So with that, we will move on then. Stephen, you're up next.
Yes, thank you, Commissioners. I will be addressing you on the accountability and transparency evolution. That's on the handout that you have in front of you. This particular handout really specifically relates to the SHOP document itself. Pre-Sb1 86, the Commission only publicly took two actions. They basically allocated right-of-way capital, which was done in a lump sum, and construction capital individually for each project. The rest of this was basically handled by Caltrans, and not that Caltrans did anything bad or wrong, but it was just not in a public process. Sb1 86 put some of this into the public process by having the Commission now program the whole SHOP document. We still only allocated right-of-way capital, and we still allocated construction capital. Sb1 took all of this up a notch even further and really put the accountability into the focus by having the Commission actually not only program the different phases of the projects, but actually allocate funds to the different phases of the projects. And that's shown how the progression of the red yeses progresses from left to right, where the Commission did just a little tiny piece in the public and did it to now the full Magilla is being done publicly in front of the public by the Commission. The STIP is sort of similar, but the difference in the STIP is that the Commission programs the STIP and all the components of the STIP, but the Commission only allocates the right-of-way, again, to the annual right-of-way lump sum allocation and construction support. The other components of project development at this point in time are still not allocated by the Commission. They're still done by Caltrans.
And just to clarify, the Commission does allocate those PS&E, PAED, and right-of-way support, the support costs to the local agencies, to the counties that are implementing. I just want to clarify that. If it's a Caltrans administered project or implemented project, that's where the allocations do not take place.
Yes, on the local side, on the RTIP side, the Commission does allocate the components because those are grants to the agencies. Now, we also have bond programs, and under the bond programs, the Commission would be allocating everything sort of and programming as if on the Senate Bill 1 side. The difference is for the bond programs, there is a limited amount of money. On the STIP and the SHOP, there's an infinite flow of funds. The funds never run out. They always replenish more funds year to year. On the bond programs, the legislature for Sb1 gave the bond program $19.5 billion, and that was it. So
for clarification, you're talking about Proposition 1B, not
yes,
Sb1.
Proposition 1B.
Okay.
On those, the Commission took a tack of requiring baseline agreements for those projects, where the project proponents, Caltrans, and the Commission signed a baseline agreement that said the money we're giving you from Prop 1B is it. Any cost overruns are on the proponent agency. And we held that line for every project that's in the bond program except for one, which is the Gerald Desmond Bridge, but that's a special case. Now we have new Sb1 programs, We're going to be running them similar to the bond program. We will be requiring baseline agreements where we will be signing agreements with the proponents saying basically, even though SB1 also has an infinite revenue stream, it never runs out, but we're going to be running it more or less like we've ran the bond programs, that we've programmed you, this is what you agreed to. Cost overruns and stuff are going to be very closely examined, but they're basically on the project proponent side. So those are the main differences of how we are running these programs. The next thing I want to address is on the next slide, which is risk. As you will notice, projects are normally programmed based on a project initiation document. At that point in time, about 80% of the stuff is unknown and about 20% of the stuff is known. As the project makes its way through the process, things are discovered, things become known, and the ratio between known and unknown changes. By the time we get to a completed design and we have a completed PS&E package where we have our environmental document done, we have our design done, we have all of our permits in hand, that's when the agencies come into the commission and ask for an allocation of funds for the construction piece of the project. So at that point in time, we know about 80% of everything, and we still don't know 20% because we just don't know what's really going to be happening once you start digging in that ground. So as this thing evolves, especially for the STIP and the shop, there are certain instances at which we do correct the estimates, because as the estimates become refined and we know things, costs can change. So we have STIP amendments, shop amendments, where we can actually fix the costs, and we have every 2 years we have a programming cycle when again costs can be adjusted. But once a project is allocated, it's allocated. On the shop side, on the support pieces, once we're basically going to be allocating the P&ED portion of these projects, where we're basically still at the 20% known, 80% unknown. But as we move through that, subsequent allocations of support components can be adjusted and can be brought up to date based on information that is derived from when the environmental process is done and when the permitting process starts. So again, there could be adjustments. But once an allocation is made by the commission for whatever component, we have what we know as the G12 resolution. Under the G12 resolution, the commission has authorized the department to manage these things within certain bounds. And if they stay within those bounds, when actions come before the commission, we just take the action. We do not examine the project specifically. But once they get outside of those bounds, that's when they come in and have to ask for supplemental allocations. That's when we discuss what happened, why it happened, and is it still a good idea to proceed with this project at the higher cost, or maybe should we put a break to it and re-examine what it is that we're doing. This is going to be, previously you only had this opportunity at the construction end of it, when we're into construction, so it was very difficult for you to say no when you need additional monies to award a project or to complete a project. Now with these phases of the pre-construction activities, if things are starting to go kilter, you will have more of an opportunity to say, well, wait a minute. If your stuff is now going to be, if you had a design or right of a component that was $100 and they're coming back and saying, oh, by the way, this is going to cost you $1 million now, you at this point will be able to examine it and say, do we really want to proceed with this, or should we take a time out and say, wait a minute, go and rethink what you're doing. So this is what gives you the opportunity to finally be able to have some say in this, instead of just saying, well, the project is already out on the street, contractors have bid, and the market has spoken, and it's going to be costing you more it's not the time to be stopping a project. Or when a project is completed and you have claims and stuff, well, you got to pay them. So now with SB1 and the shift in the dynamic, there's going to be more opportunity to examine things that are going outside of the process. The process itself, the G12 process, is described in the next handout, which is the actual G12 resolution. And what it basically says, for projects under $1 million, the department has $200,000 leeway. For projects over $1 million, the department has $200,000 plus 10% leeway. This way, we do not stop project delivery. The department can deliver, the department can manage, and if things get outside of that box, then they come in front of a commission. These are the basic tenets of our project delivery. And
Hey, Steve, can I add on to that? Because this chart is a great chart. And one of the other things to think about is when we do a project initiation document, we're coming up with the estimate that it's going to take us to do the environmental clearance, to do the design, to buy the right-of-way, and to do construction, and to do the oversight on construction. We do that at the far left of that chart. We haven't even selected the preferred alternative yet at the end of the environmental document. Now, we do need to set that budget, and then program, and we should be fairly accurate on the PA&ED portion of it because we're about to enter into that. But when we get to the end of PA&ED, we may start off by doing one scope of work for a rehabilitation of a bridge and end up with a different scope of work for a rehabilitation of a bridge because now we've done some preliminary engineering. So we may be at the completion of PA&ED selecting a different alternative, and then we may be allocating different dollars than was originally envisioned at the far left of that chart. And the only reason I'm pointing that out is, I don't have any issue with coming back and telling that story, but I understand that, we would be setting the baseline of that at the time of writing a document. And by the way, 2 or 3 years have transpired on some of these larger projects before we go to construction. But we set that at the expectation at the very left end of that chart before we've even selected the preferred alternative. The construction cost, right-of-way cost, design costs, all of it.
And that's very good because you will be seeing this chart in the department presentation. This is a very important chart to get the concept that when we start the process, we don't know much about it. When we get to after design, we know a lot about it. That's why on the Prop 1B program, we actually program stuff that has already environmental documents done, and we're actually programming just construction, because we did not want to be in that position where we're programming stuff and we don't really know what it is that we're going to be getting yet. And that worked very well. Now, in the SB1 area, we need to be very cautious because we'll be programming and selecting projects. A lot of those will be in the PA&ED phase before we know quite a lot about those projects. But again, the project sponsors will be signing agreements telling us that the stuff that we programmed it at that is the cost, whereas the preferred alternative might not have been selected yet. Environmental agencies have not weighed in yet. Permitting agencies have not weighed in yet. The design isn't done yet. So those are all risks when a project is being developed. And that's why I want you to keep this chart in mind. Actually, we're going to write it later on. We're going to tattoo it on your foreheads.
We have any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
I just wanted to say, on something like this is such good information, and a lot of times as we're now moving into a public process, it's probably not a bad idea to one extent or another that this becomes part of a regular report that, reminds individuals that see these things that there is uncertainty in the beginning, and we see a lot of changes that come along, and that's because of what you have right here. And it's just one of those things where, again, it might not be a bad idea that whenever you guys, when you've got agenda items or packets where the commission's got to approve things, the public may not always understand this, and this is an important piece. You know it innately.
Yes, and that's why we kind of developed this chart to kind of visually show this, because most people do not understand this, that people think something was programmed for $100 and it should stay $100. No, it's not going to stay $100, because as we go through the process, we discover more things are as I call, we have known unknowns in the beginning, and then we have unknown unknowns.
And just because this is such an important element of trust and accountability with Sb1 and everything that we're doing, especially with Prop 69 on the June ballot, including something like this in all, whatever documents, whether it's Caltrans producing it or it's the commission reviewing it, just making this part of it might not be a bad idea.
Yeah, that's a very good idea, Commissioner. So any other questions?
And if you would refresh my recollection, Stephen, and maybe Malcolm as well, when you were talking about 2,500 projects going on at any one time, under the old rules, and this is again, my memory is, when we would get to issues with program delivery, we're probably dealing with 5% of the toughest projects. That most of the projects under the old rules, 95% of them were generally on time and on budget. I'm just talking old rules. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, actually, the department's presentation will show the statistics.
Yes.
And it's even going to be the same under the new rules, except now we'll be adding the statistics for the program development pieces that we previously didn't have. But I'm expecting them to probably show up the same way. That's why when we were modifying the G12 resolution for the support components, I basically said, no, for the time being, let's keep it the same.
Yes.
Because we know that works very well on the capital side. I don't expect it to work any different on the support side. Originally, the department was very nervous about it, but I think they've developed more trust into this process.
Well, and I think that's a really important point to make, because I could see, I don't want to say the wrong word, but I could see as you're breaking the process up, that there's a lot more mischief in oversight that can happen along the way in overzealous second guessing. And that's what I want us to never forget, that, you know, the metrics have been pretty good so far. And we have to recognize that there's a lot of dynamic changes that are in the process at any one time. So for me, it's important to remember we're talking about 5% and trying to capture that stray million before it turns into a stray billion. Is that a fair statement to make?
That's a very fair statement.
Okay.
And I think the overall process, it's not changing. There was nothing bad that the department was doing previously. It was just that it was hidden from, it was not in the public domain.
That's right.
People did not see what was happening. Now with the commission involved, it's all in the public domain. People can see what's happening. People understand, well, I don't know if they'll understand what's happening, but at least they will see what's happening. And then there's this accountability piece that you are actually now allocating these funds. And that's where the legislature and the analyst's office and Department of Finance, that's what they were looking for, because previously they said, well, we don't know what Caltrans is doing. They're changing stuff and we don't know what's happening. This way, this will get those entities off of Caltrans' back, but then might put them on our back.
Right.
So
now we are going to be
Commissioner, I think it's a very valid point, and the fact that the process is changing is not a bad thing, it's a good thing.
Yes.
And the number of projects, or the percentage of projects that we came for adjustments on the capital side, the construction side, is actually less than 3%. Now, as we go to allocating the individual phases, our proficiency is going to go up. It's not that we were not managing the individual budgets for PA&ED and PS&E and those types of things. We were doing that. Now we're going to you're going to allocate those, and we're going to manage them at this level. And that's a good thing. I expect that capital proficiency of less than 3%, we're probably not on day one going to be that proficient when we multiply this times 4.
Exactly.
But we're going to get to that level of proficiency. So I would expect that Stephen's right, that same leadway, because if we say $10 or $100, I don't know how concerned you are when we come in at 101, 102, or 92, or 94, and actually on those, we come out net under the $100 programmatically. It's the ones that get outside the box that we really should come back and have to make adjustments for, and that's that G12. So what we've had on the capital side, I think, is perfectly appropriate on the support side, as Stephen articulated, and I think that will minimize the ones. But I mean, it has been a very good success rate. I think there will be a little bit of growing pains and some proficiency upticks for us when we start doing the same practice on the support side.
Yeah, the only thing I would just emphasize is I think you should say that at every single meeting, is remember, we're dealing with the 3%, we're dealing with the 5%, that overwhelmingly we have met the public's trust in delivery of projects, because I don't think it's said enough. It's very easy to focus on the bad stuff, and granted, the bad stuff can be tremendously huge. I get that. But maintaining a public trust also means celebrating the successes. And I don't think we tend to do that as well in this process from the past. So I'm hoping in the new process, we can take advantage of this opportunity to highlight that.
Yes,
And it's more than just ribbon cuttings and groundbreakings, right? It's
No, the department produces a G12 report for us.
Yeah.
Where they tell us the pluses and minuses that are in the bounds. Maybe we should start bringing those reports to the commission at every commission meeting, so you will see how they are doing overall. Now, with the economy picking up and everything else, we might be further to
Yes.
on the other side.
We
Right
have
now-
challenges with construction costs. We know that, as I said, this is going to be a dynamic change in the system. And we worry that, as we've talked about many times, that sometimes Caltrans sets the new standard for how high a project needs to be, as opposed to being competitive with what can be in the private sector. So I think those are the challenges I'd like to really see us look at. But I appreciate
Yes.
looking at the positive side as well.
And I've examined the G12 process over the years, and over the years, everything balances out.
Yes.
There are certain years, like in the early 2000s, when we were on the wrong side because the economy was very hot. In the last 10 years, the economy wasn't that great, so
Good
we
point.
were on the other side very
Good point.
much. But in the future, we could be on the wrong side again, but over time, it all evens out.
Stephen, as we go through this process, I think there are times where scopes are going to change when we start here, and scopes are going to change before we get here. And I appreciate that. But a good example was in the commission meeting we just wrapped up. There was some big scope changes for continuous reinforced concrete on a series of shop projects that raised the cost dramatically in one section of California. But there's also was a scope change that was proposed on I-5 for a bridge over the California Aqueduct, which we talked about, which, you know, takes what should be a $9 million project to a $31 million project. And I would hope that as all of us as custodians of taxpayer money, just because some agency over here has one mandate and we have another mandate, that we couldn't get together and figure out how to do our mandates together in a way that saves the taxpayers dollars. That may be Pollyannish of me, but I'm the new guy and so I get to be naive. But I beg you, when those situations come up, please don't just accept that as gospel that this agency over here, that we can't come back and as a commission, speak to the legislature, speak to somebody. It's frustrating to me that projects that are reasonable projects that should be X become 3X just because another agency over here says, well, we've just changed our mind and we don't have to give you a reason why.
Those are very true statements. We certainly should be looking out for.
But I'm saying use us as a resource,
Yes.
Caltrans, use us as a resource to help you through those processes. We may not be successful, but we should at least try, because we have other agencies that have become insulated and don't ever respond to the taxpayer as often they should.
The other agencies look at Caltrans as a deep pocket.
Well, we're not. We're trying to use, and that's what I want to get over. We're not a deep pocket. We are a pocket that quite frankly, we have to utilize the resources that we take from the citizenry, which for many of us, it's not a sacrifice. For some people, it is. We should use those in the best manner and best manner possible. And it's just, there's frustrating examples where I feel like if we had those brought to the commission in a more transparent, no, they are transparent in a way where commissioners help us. Help us in this situation where this is a project that should be a $9 million project. It doesn't have to be a $30 million project. It's only going to be a $30 million project because this state agency over here is being transigent.
We can certainly try to bring those things to you earlier where you can actually weigh in on this. It's not to say that Caltrans didn't try to reason with Water Resources and others. They did all of that stuff, and they kind of said, okay, if we need to do whatever we need to do with this bridge, and the only way we're going to do it is if we replace the bridge and take the piers out of the water. But they certainly could have had that project. Now we're starting the watch list and stuff. It could have been on the watch list, and the commission could then weigh in and say, the department could even ask the commissioner, do you want to weigh in with that agency and see if you can help us? So
or the legislature, our friends in the legislature could weigh in as well, so. Yes. Which they're not here at the moment, but I point to where they generally would be if.
So we would be very much examining the projects on the watch list and see if there are these things that can be, the one that you're bringing out was actually already a programming action where we're changing the scope of the project because it was almost a done.
I just want us to all be on the same team of trying to bring these projects in at the most reasonable way possible.
I think the department is hearing you, and they will be using you as their Trojan horse to get some of the stuff.
As long as we use all of Joe's powers to get things done.
Let's jump out there and see if we can hear from our Caltrans partners. But on the housekeeping side, for those of you that are watching remotely, the documents, we'll make sure that we do post those for you. We apologize if they weren't out in advance, and also that we'll have extra copies back here for others. But in the meantime, look up. Jim, you're up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jim Davis, Capital Outlet Support Program Manager. I shared this slide yesterday at my project delivery report, and it's looking at our workload for this fiscal year to really put in context our program and how big it is relative to the various programs that we work on. 70% of the work that we work on is either SHOP or the new Sb1 projects that are related to SHOP-type projects. 14% are partnership projects with local or majors, where we have a cooperative agreement with those entities to deliver a project for them. 10% is for STIP projects, and then the final 5% is for seismic, Prop 1B, high-speed rail, and various small little programs. The phases of project development, I want to take just a minute and walk you through this and help you to understand what we do in each one of these phases, because I think it's helpful. So when a project initiation document is completed, it defines the purpose and need of the proposed project. It's been working with stakeholders, it's identified alternatives, and it's come up with a preliminary scope, schedule, and cost. All risks that are known at that time are accounted for. But like Stephen said, that only accounts for about 20% of the known. There's still 80% that's unknown at that particular time. We then move into the project approval and environmental document phase. That's where we start doing our engineering studies and our environmental studies on each one of the alternatives. We go through that analysis. As new information comes to bear, scopes may be refined. That's not unusual. We select a preferred alternative. We coordinate with local agencies, many of our permitting agencies, although we don't secure the permits at this time. And one of the things that SB 1482, which was a recommendation that came out of the commission a year ago, was to take a look at the permitting process and figure out how we can do the permitting process more efficient. And I'll just jump forward to the design phase. It's usually at the end of the design phase that we go get our permits. And sometimes we run into some challenges with our permitting agencies at the 11th hour. And that's really late in the process. And so I think both at a national level and a state level, those are opportunities for us to figure out how we really nail down the scope, understand what are our commitments to resource agencies for mitigation, those types of things early on. So if I could offer that as an opportunity that I think for project delivery that I think would be very helpful for the department as well as our local partners out there as well. It's not saying, like Commissioner Arp did yesterday, that we're against the environmental process and not for the environment, because I think we are. That's part of our mission statement, that we do that. But I think there's ways of doing it more efficiently and more effectively.
Earlier.
At the conclusion of the project approval and environmental document, we may or may not have a different scope, schedule, and cost. Most of the times we don't, but sometimes that we do. And then we would come back to the commission, and that's in the white space there, where we come back to the commission for an allocation, and it may be an amendment or at that time. Although sometimes what happens is 80% of our projects that we're working on are under $5 million. So they're real small projects. And so we may tick through these phases very quickly. By commission guidelines, if we're in the year that we plan to go to construction and it may only take us 4 or 5 months to do the design and we have to do a change, then we may have to come to you for a supplemental for that next phase. And that's just the nuances of our guidelines. So that's just we are, because 80% of our program are small projects. One thing with Sb1 and with asset management is it's getting the department to think differently. And I'm very excited about that, because we're putting together 10-year plans. Instead of going a whole bunch of small projects, we're always going to have small projects. I don't want to go, we are going to have small projects. But as I look at our 10-year plan that we're coming up with asset management, we're going to have a lot more corridor type projects and thinking smarter and going into these corridors to get in and get out. It also provides leverage and opportunities with some of the other Sb1 competitive programs or local or major projects, whereas we're rehabbing a facility, maybe it's a 10-mile stretch of the highway, it may be that we're widening it at the same time. And so from the public perspective, we can come in, get out, and stay out of there for 20 years. And that would be ideal. And there's an efficiency or an economy of scale when you put projects together. The cost of the projects overall are less than when they would be individually. So I think that's a real huge opportunity for us. Once we move into the design phase, after we know the scope, schedule, cost, we develop the plans, the specifications, and we want to make sure that they're biddable and buildable. We obtain our permits and our agreements. We look at our risks. We update our contract bid documents. We advertise, award, and approve the construction contract. All this time, we're working with our various stakeholders on the project. And on many of these projects, there are a lot of stakeholders that we have to work with: cities, counties, resource agencies, permittees. While we're doing the design, we're also looking at the right-of-way and procuring the right-of-way. We're putting our right-of-way engineering and surveys together. We're coming up and acquiring the right-of-way, and sometimes that comes to a condemnation or a resolution of necessity, which comes before the commission. We're relocating utilities, entering into railroad agreements, which is a challenge when we have to deal with the railroad. And then we come up with a right-of-way certification. And finally, we move into construction, where the contractor starts their work. We're inspecting that work and making sure it complies with our plans and specifications. We also have engineering out there, because sometimes we don't make these plans and specs completely bulletproof. It's very not cost effective to do that. So there is some risk in there. And we have engineering that helps out in construction when we run into an issue. The last thing that we do is close out activities. After the contractor is done, we come and dispose of excess parcels. We follow up with our long-term mitigation commitments with the permitting agencies. And sometimes we have claims or arbitration or lawsuits, and we have to come back to the commission. So that explains the different phases. Are there any questions on that?
Go ahead.
I just had a question on 80% of your projects are under $5 million. Is Caltrans the best agency to do those quote-unquote small projects? I mean, do you devolve them or allow them to be managed more by locals, or how does that work?
So we manage each one of those. Each one of those does have a project manager.
Yes.
They're usually for a small fix. It may be to go in and replace guardrail on a stretch of highway, or maybe replacing curb ramps, things that we have to do on our system.
Right, okay. I'm just wondering, with this kind of process, is it more efficient for Caltrans to be doing it versus a regional agency, a local?
No, it's a great question. So I'm using a broad process, but when it comes, and I shared with you yesterday, and I apologize, I don't have it in my slide today, we looked at 80% of our projects are small. 90% are category exclusions or exemptions,
Yes.
which only cost about $14,000. So
Got it.
although it sounds like a large process, the engineering or the environmental document is only about $14,000.
Okay.
The next slide I shared with you yesterday.
Commissioner Dunn, one thing as he's moving from one slide to the other, look, the straightforward bread and butter projects, the rehab, the guardrail, whatever those are, under $5 million, they're not on your list when we're coming here for adjustments. We're cranking them out. It's not going to be more efficient to contract those out. That discussion's more appropriate on the bigger, more complex projects. Those bread and butter ones, we're just cranking them out.
Again, another opportunity to show value to the public on what you do that is your expertise and that you're delivering efficiently and effectively. God, somebody needs to tell your story, Malcolm.
We don't need all that little stuff coming. We don't.
I get it, totally get it.
That's just a bunch that we don't need, and you folks get it done and get out of it.
You actually never see any of that stuff because that's done within budget, within scope, and if not, it's still within the G12 authority, so it just slides through. But Commissioner Dunn is right. The department needs to have a storyteller to tell their story.
That's an exclusion from the process that we have set forth here. Is that? So they'll never come to us.
Majority of the projects never come to you except for their programming and allocation actions. They don't come back to you for any supplementals or anything
Even
else
if it's an overrun.
Because there usually no overrun, or if there is a slight overrun, it's within the delegation.
Okay.
Let me ask you a question. You talk about getting permits and permitting these projects. How close are you folks to counties, cities, public works, planning, building departments on getting your permits that you need? Are you, and I say it, but I'm sure that you cultivate that so that you have someone that knows how to open those doors, as John Belinsky does in the Riverside area, that when he first came there, he started meeting all these folks and is looked up to, and it makes it a lot easier for him, I'm almost sure, because Public Works can call him, they've got his number, and when he wants something, to the best of my knowledge, he doesn't have a lot of problems getting it because it's a two-way street. And I'm sure all you folks do the same thing. Do you have problems with those folks that slows your process up?
I would say in general, we're all doing the same thing, coordination, and also with environmental permits, we're meeting with the resource agencies in our area to kind of talk them through issues before they become unsolvable. So there's pretty regular communication at the district level with the resource agencies and other local agencies.
I assume that that's the way it would be. Thank you.
Yeah, Joe, the biggest problems are the environmental agencies from whom you need a lot of the permits. On regular Caltrans right-of-way, the local cities and counties don't really have much of a permitting process. What really becomes on the state right-of-way is the process going through the environmental agencies.
Well, of course, it works both ways, that the cities and counties now and then need right-of-way permits or some of those things, and I use John here because I work closely with him, and permitting that he does now is, I mean, it's done immediately, and unless they have a problem, but other than that, the city thinks that the sun sets in him because when they need a encroachment permit or something, it's done. And I'm sure you're all doing that. I'm using John because I work with him in my area, but I'm sure that you all do the same politicking as he does.
Yes, it's the cities and counties that come to the department when they want to encroach upon the department's right-of-way, and they need permits from the department.
Yeah, thank you.
So if I can just speak to this for a minute. The big issues that we have are, as Stephen mentions, the resource agencies where we need permits. If we need an individual permit from one resource agency, generally that's not an issue. The real issues come in when we need multiple permits from different resource agencies. Each one of them has their own mission, and so it can become a problem when those missions aren't in alignment with each other. I'll give you an example. We have a project in Victorville where we are replacing a bridge, and we have a permit required from 3 different resource agencies. We came up with a solution that appeased each of the agencies, and we put the project out to bid with those conditions included. The contractor came to the site and offered up an alternative method of construction, which would have impacted the construction of the project and the permit requirements that were already included. So I thought I was smart. I thought, okay, the best thing to do is to get all the resource agencies together and come to some common ground on the modification. It took 6 months of conversation with the resource agencies. At the end of the day, we went back to the original plan. That is where the problem lies. So I really appreciate, Commissioner, your comment regarding the need for us to get out and work with the resource agencies in a partnership format and come to a common understanding of what is required for a project, what impacts we have on a project. And I think more at a programmatic level rather than project specific.
Yeah.
Because once you get to the project specific level, you have individuals within those agencies that have their own mind on, or their own ideas on what needs to be accomplished.
You stated clearly, we need to have in this, we need to have a broader conversation, because I don't think people outside this room know that's going on. I think because it's all individual between agencies, it's not rising to the top. I dare say the legislature doesn't fully appreciate what's going on in those situations. It's costing us all money, and I don't think environmentally we're better off. We're not better served. We're not, so again, echoing what everyone said, no one's trying to skirt anything environmentally. We just want to have a path to go forward that respects both the environment and how we're spending this money.
And to add to this commission, to the complexity of this commission, we do not only deal with state environmental agencies, they have to deal with federal environmental agencies, and sometimes you have the same agency at the state level and at the federal level charged with the same thing, and they have totally different visions.
So can I give one more example?
Of course, John,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, so one of the other issues, we talk about the CEs, the categorical exemptions and exclusions that we process for a majority of our projects. Well, when we are on federal land, Forest Service, BLM, they do not accept a CE, regardless of what level of impact that requires. So that pushes us into a higher level of environmental document that we don't feel is necessary, but in order to get their approvals, whether it's through a permit or to acquire the right-of-way, we are still needing to process a higher level document. And that increases certainly the support cost at a minimum, if not the construction component.
Commissioner Madaffer.
So along those lines, just a couple of comments. Obviously, we understand the federal administration through the president's speech alluded to that this week, which is, if that could even happen in a small way. And I think Elaine Chao certainly understands it. And that would be helpful. Senator Christine Kehoe probably set a standard in San Diego on something that didn't start out as good as we liked, but it ended up working out fantastic on the I-5 corridor. And I think that, as you were alluding earlier, is a good way to plan. We were able to do it all in one fell swoop. The other thing that we have done in San Diego, that Sandag has done. Yeah, I mean.
For a public works project, the whole thing.
Yeah, we should say Senate Bill, was it 486? Senate Bill 486 gave the coastal permit, the whole enchilada in one package deal. And I think we were able to achieve that in large part because of something that Sandag and Caltrans, and Ms. Berman can certainly speak to that, and I wish she would, because I've talked about it previously here, that I think it's a model that the rest of the state should be adopting, and that's what we do in San Diego by creating and having positions called corridor managers. And I'm sure you're all familiar with them, but it's probably not a bad idea, Lori, just to take a moment just to give a Reader's Digest version of what that is. While it can work in San Diego because of Sandag and the unique situation with District 11, it may not work everywhere. But I got to tell you, it has eliminated a lot of red tape, a lot of bureaucracy, and has really sped things up. So I don't know, Laura, if you would mind.
Sure. So we have for several years had corridor directors who have responsibility for delivering the projects on their corridor. And these aren't the smaller projects. These are the big corridors, the I-5s, 76s, the new port of entry. And the corridor directors at this point are Caltrans employees, but they work for both Caltrans and Sandag. They're responsible to both Caltrans and Sandag. They report to the Sandag Board of Directors pretty regularly, and when there's cost increases, they need to go and explain that. This gives us a lot of value. One is that we have one person responsible, not a couple different teams doing different things. We have blended teams. The things that Caltrans does really well, we do. There's a lot of things that we can't get access to. One of the things we did early on was set up project dashboards to show where the money was being spent and the progress. Sandag had the ability to pull in some IT folks and set up something that would have taken us a bit longer. So we each do what we do well, and it works really well. And when Commissioner Kehoe was Senator Kehoe, the I-5 project, now it seems like it's a tremendously successful project. And when we first started working on it, I can remember my first meeting with the Coastal Commission and Sandag and Caltrans when I became a district director, and I didn't see how we were going to get that project done. And I know we had several discussions about what you wanted to do with your bill, and we were trying to ultimately what that bill did was it set up a framework for two agencies to trust each other and to recognize our different missions and build trust, so that we didn't want to find ourselves buying a lot of right-of-way or mitigation, doing a lot of mitigation, and then find out 10 years down the road when we're into phase 2 or phase 3 that the Coastal Commission would say, no, now we need to do more. So it built a lot of trust, and it also meant that we would not proceed in building just the highway portion first, and then if we had money, we'd come back and do the rail and bike path. And it's a tremendous success. It's a great project. It's built so much trust that the coastal staff speaks for the project, not just for the Coastal Commission. The other thing I would say that's worked really well on that is we periodically, with different agencies, we pay for a staff person who will review. They're independent, but their first and foremost job is our projects. And with Sb1, this is really going to be a concern because it's not just Caltrans, it's all the locals that are going to need permits, and we really need to be thinking about how to make that work, because the resource agencies, they do have a different mission. They did not get any additional staffing with Sb1, so that's going to be an issue for us.
So just to clarify, we actually hire people, or they hire them, but we pay for that person in the Coastal Commission staff who's dedicated to the project. It relieves their budgetary issues, and it improves efficiency tremendously. So again, thank you, Lori, for that. I would just urge Malcolm, you and the rest of the team, as you look at project delivery and speeding things up. Again, I know it doesn't work everywhere, but that San Diego model has definitely proven. And maybe when we come down to San Diego in May, as I mentioned already, certainly seeing Highway 11 and what's happening down there. And maybe we'll get a chance to see then Senator and now Commissioner Kehoe's North Coast project that truly should be a model for the whole state.
I would agree with I would agree with that, and we have expanded that concept in certain areas, and we can certainly do more. So we will do that. And on another, it's not just the Coastal Commission where we're augmenting staff at resource agencies. We're doing that at multiple resource agencies to make sure that our workload is getting addressed. And the point that Lori made is a very important one. I'm worried about their capacity and bandwidth when the Sb1 program starts to kick in, and we're going to have to be very thoughtful and work with them on our programmatic agreements with the resource agencies so they can keep up.
And Commissioners, this is our first workshop. It's not our last workshop. And what I would be no.
Yeah, that's all.
And I would suggest that probably at a future workshop, we do a deep dive into the environmental permitting process.
Great idea.
Jean? Go for it.
Yes, we're talking about the project delivery, and there are different models of project delivery across the state that we're using. You just highlighted what is going on in San Diego. In Bay Area, we're working with 9 congestion management agencies, 9 counties. And in a lot of cases where we have projects, and in most cases, there is not one agency that actually delivers a project. It's a partnership that makes that success. And so when we have multiple partners with the counties, we actually put together an integrated team. We have an executive steering committee that is the head of the CMA of the counties involved and myself. And those are the decision makers, and we have project managers on those projects. And an integrated team that has maybe consultants, our consultants, local consultants, or local staff that guides the project through its ups and downs and tries to manage the risk of the project and to deliver. And the decisions are being made jointly because we are at times making decisions on somebody else's money. And so it's important for them to be at the table so that when a decision is made and a cost is incurred, that those agencies who owns those money are making those decisions jointly with us and get us to that success of the delivery of the project.
Well, it's Jim. Why don't you continue?
Well, I think there are also other folks that are making decisions on our money too, so that we do need those partnerships.
The next slide I have on slide 4 was we took a look at 751 shop construction projects that finished construction over the last 3 fiscal years. It was a little bit less than $5 billion in totality of costs, and we put it into a pie chart, basically equated back to $1, just to show you where we spend our money. And about 70 cents on the dollar is in construction or construction administration, and then the rest is in our preliminary engineering. One of the things we want to talk, and Director Doherty's talked about this a little bit, but I want to go a little bit deeper dive, is how we're organized for program management. We have districts and we have a headquarters. The districts are responsible for delivering to the project, and headquarters has provided oversight and accountability to the districts. Each district, each project has a scope, cost, schedule, and outputs of what they're trying to accomplish. A project manager is assigned. That project manager has a manager called a single focal point, and they're responsible for delivery, and they report to the district director. Director Doherty has a contract for delivery with all the major milestones with each one of the district directors, and they made a commitment to deliver each one of those milestones to the director. We status those projects, the district status those projects, and they identify and manage risks. They also regularly review their portfolio. Each district director on a regular basis sits down with all their project managers and reviews the portfolio of projects and going over any of the challenges or issues. Up at headquarters, we're always referring back to the program document and the commission guidelines, right? That's our Bible for what we do. We have that statewide plan, that contract for delivery. We're actually tracking it weekly. Director Doherty has a big cardboard presentation of our contract for delivery, and all 282 projects are on there with dates, and we check them off once a week. Each one of us division chiefs have our own for each one of our milestones that we're responsible for. And we're looking, not necessarily that they hit the exact date, but if we start seeing things slipping for a few weeks, we start making some phone calls and start seeing, hey, what's going on? Do you have any problems? Is there anything we can do from headquarters? we're also looking for trends. We're not trying to micromanage, because the responsibility really is the district's, and that's where it belongs. We are looking for trends and looking for challenges, and we'll find different resource agencies where we're having problems. And then we raise it up and try to have higher level discussions at a management level with those resource agencies.
Jim, excuse me just a second. Commissioner Kehoe, I think maybe wants to take you back to your pie chart.
Yeah, to page 4, if you can. So when we're discussing these examples where it bogs down under the permit applications for environmental work, whether it's amongst state agencies or feds to state or state to fed, on these expenditures, it looks like environmental work is a tiny fraction. So how, when the district director says it took 6 months to get one permit worked out, and actually went back to the original one that you already had completed, I mean, are the costs of all that contained in that 0.5 sentence?
They are, but this is 751 projects. And remember that 80% of our projects are under $5 million, and 90% are CEs. And so when you look at the program level, you come up with a small amount. On an individual project, that could be a lot larger.
Okay, so you're down,
Now,
this
now
is
in
the
fairness,
totality.
on that example, I'll bet those delays and costs were absorbed under construction, not environmental.
Yeah, I think they get.
Why is that, Malcolm?
Well, because we're already into the construction phase, and now time is money when you're in construction. In that particular example, I'll bet those costs were absorbed under our construction phase.
Is that right? Okay.
And some of these environmental needs that you're trying to meet cause an increase in the cost of the construction of the project.
Yeah,
and that's not that's what Commissioner Arp wants to capture, is what it is that it's, once you do what the environmental agency wants you to do, what is that cost? And that's buried in the construction piece, and he wants to extract that out of the construction piece to make it more apparent.
I would totally agree. I mean, getting a handle on, we hear all the time that the environmental costs are, sometimes wasteful and time consuming, and I'm trying to get an accurate handle on that. So the more info that I would welcome it on the costs of permitting, and if it's buried in some other column, that would be good to know too.
It's like with the bridge that Commissioner Van Kynenberg was questioning. The original cost of the project was $9 million, but after the permitting process with DWR, we have to replace the bridge, which is now costing $30 million. So the delta between the 9 and the 30 is really an environmental cost. It's not the cost of the construction. Yes, you're constructing something, but you're doing it because of the environmental process.
That's important.
Paul,
Jim, as you know, yesterday there was a presentation on the efficiencies that you guys want to. So if 2 years from now, if you ran this same pie chart, what would you like? You don't have to answer this today because this is like, I'm not going to make you do math on the spot. But I was not aware there would be math on this test today.
He's an engineer, he can do math.
But if you could just, at some point, what's a standard for this pie chart you'd like it to be? Here's what it is, here's what you'd like it to be. Okay, thanks.
What's interesting about that comment is there's a bunch of things that we're going to be doing from an efficiency perspective, but that may be all outweighed by the lack of bidders and the costs going back on the construction. So it's a dynamic process.
Right.
But Jim, I think maybe the consensus we heard yesterday from Commissioner Arp and a bunch of us who spend our day jobs in the development world, this looks like maybe it's just a sliver of what we're really investing in our environmental efforts. So I think maybe we need to make sure that we do capture those, and then we can make good decisions, because we have limited resources. We don't have infinite dollars, and so we do need to spend wisely, and to the extent that we can make a lot of project with one solution instead of going back and starting over and, John, to turn gray on us while we get the project, so.
And I've committed to Commissioner Arp and to you that we're doing that deeper dive on these 751 projects to get down into those numbers. And so we're doing that, but it's a very laborious process. It's project by hand, digging in and asking questions and doing that digging.
And how many of those $14,000 CEs could you get, except that you can't do that on any federal? Do you know how big that list is?
No, I do not.
I mean, if the governor or the president does want to have some streamlining or something, maybe that is an area we could all work together to see if there's a way to make that happen. So it'd be interesting.
Commissioner, I mean, that's a very good point, and I've torn into those numbers, especially the construction management and the engineering support. It's not just construction oversight in that number. Surveys for construction staking is in that number. Design support, when something doesn't fit and it has to be adjusted, is in that number, as well as if there are environmental commitments, monitoring those environmental commitments is all in the construction phase. So we will definitely go back and look at breaking that out, seeing it, and then maybe how we capture it in the future.
And we've been very, one more.
Just, sorry, if the vast majority, it sounds like, of the projects are, below that threshold of over the total costs and, the complexity, and most of these environmental costs and permit delays and things like that are on these bigger, complicated projects, can you pull out the little ones and give it would help me to visualize, if 35 or 70% of your projects are these ones that get the $14,000 permit, what's the rest of the picture look like?
Yeah, Jay, we track this on spreadsheets on the different magnitudes of projects. I mean, we look at the different costs of different phases for our under $5 million projects as well as our over $50 million projects, and we can share that breakout for you.
Thank you, Malcolm. Thank you. Jim?
Thank you, Chair. It may be a little late for this information. I was trying to add it. With this chart and with the table we had right before this, where it shows the environmental document, if you want to think about it, that environmental document kind of scopes what the impacts are and everything, but it's in that next phase that we call PS&E or design that we're actually applying for the individual permits. The agencies want to see a little more than just our rough design. They want to see it when we're a little further. Say if it's an agency that's really concerned with our impacts around streams. They don't want to just know approximately. And so those permit, if you'll call them delays, or those negotiations and applied, are really in that pink section. So we've tried to meet with agencies programmatically to see how much of that can we push back into that CEQA process so that their concerns are met and we don't have the long delays later. The earlier we can do it. But a lot of times with theirs, they really want to see some of that exact. And that forces it towards the end of design, where then if they want any changes, we have more redesign. So that is one of our efficiencies we're looking at that I believe Jim mentioned. How early can we start that permit thing? And we've met with, I know, Coastal Commission. We've had a very long understanding of each other's missions and where the overlaps are. So how can we get some of the earlier buy-in so when they see the permit, they say, oh, this is exactly what we're expecting. We had a Lean 6 with Fish and Wildlife, just to look at that. So the very first application we give them, how can that be a complete application rather than 5 or 6 back and forth just to make sure they can start it? So those are the kind of things we're doing just to speed up those permitting processes, starting them early and making sure the joint expectations are there. So we've had a lot of effort in those.
Thank you. Jim, you're still on?
Yes, ma'am. So going back to slide 5, from a headquarters perspective, we monitor deviations from scope, schedule, cost, and performance. Quarterly, I sit down with each one of the single focal points with each one of the districts, and we go through those deviations. And so that is being monitored. And then on a quarterly report, I provide to you where we are. And it provides the watch list and the statistics of how we're doing on achieving those milestones. And if we have risk, either on schedule and or cost, it comes to you. The next slide, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce Totera to talk about our change control process and how we're doing that and the controls that we have in place.
Thank you, Jim. Bruce Daytera, Programming. And Jim, if I could ask you to go back to slide 3, I'd like to use that one to illustrate some places where the commission takes action and where we have opportunities. I'm going to split my remarks into two components. One, what we're talking about now of our current project delivery with the shop, and you see we have a very robust oversight and a very oiled machine on doing that, and we're refining it, making it better. And then there's the other part that I believe was alluded to yesterday about the new requirements of SB1 and the oversight and our experience with some of the Proposition 1B audit findings that we are finding, and how we're preparing to not be in that same position with the SB1 implementation. So I'm going to split my remarks into those two components. But first, let me deal with the shop projects. So the slide, and I think you all have that up in front of you, or with the arrows. So we come to the commission where the white arrows, where there's an opportunity where if we're running into problems, where it's automatically daylighted with you as we come in for an allocation where there's a change that has to happen. In between the controls that Jim mentioned, he actually has additional controls as well. Beyond the quarterly VTCs, video conferences he has with the districts, we also quarterly meet with all the single focal points, the leads in the districts for project delivery. We meet in person and we go over issues and problems that the department's running into, and also best practices, how people can improve their projects. So at those, we're meeting regularly with the districts on those. In the in-between times where a project might get in trouble, we have a formal process in place where the district will bring a project up that has to have changes, and it goes up to this district director level to sign off. So it'll be the project team, they say we need this change, the project manager will sign off, the individual who's called the single focal point, the individual that's in charge of project delivery overall within the district, they have to review it and they sign off on it, and then the district director gets it. After that, it winds up moving up to headquarters, where we have a similar structure of our office chiefs from each of our programs. Take a look at this. They meet regularly to talk about all the projects that may have issues, and they weigh whether they want to approve that to move forward for further approval, or if it's a real big problem that they don't feel that they're either capable of responding to in terms of the degree of the problem, they'll kick it up to an executive team. And that executive team consists of Jim. Well, actually, it exists with all the people you see on this end of the table, as well as the chief engineer and the chief financial officer, where we will sit there and discuss that project. Sometimes the results of that have been that we kick the project out. We do what's called unparring it. We see that your problem is not resolvable. You need to go back to square one and start again, rescope your project, because your project scope has changed. You thought it was going to be this, and the scope is too different from where you were to bring that forward as an amendment to the commission. You need to go back, start over, rescope it, and figure out where we're going to be rather than trying to amend it. Other times, we will concur that the issue deserves to come forward to the commission. We've done all that we can to resolve it, and this is happening within that time period before it would come to you. So this is in the yellow, in the pink, in the construction, during the phases where we're adjusting these, and then we would come forward to you for a change in that respect. My mic's not? Oh, okay. I can hear myself just fine. I'm sorry. Thank you. So, well, I don't know if that actually, I don't think at least for the commissioners, I need to repeat any of that. But we have robust processes, and so when you are seeing those, and typically we're seeing a handful per commission meeting that have gone through this process and vetted, versus having a tremendous amount. So, and then that is the changes that are approved are reported in our G12, which Jim talked about yesterday, that are on balance we're coming in under, with the cost increases we may be coming in over.
And the one thing I would want to add, Bruce, to your remarks is that after it's gone through you and then it's ready to go to the commission, then at that point staff is informed, your staff is informed, the commission staff, and the commission staff, the engineers that we have, Stephen and Rick, and now Terry, will take a look at that and ask questions as well. So at times there are agenda items that don't come forward as a result of those questions as well. So there's one additional layer I just wanted to add to that review.
Yes. And I do want to, I guess you could call it a shout out to your staff. They don't wait for these things, for these rare projects to come forward. They're actively engaged in them with us all the time. I mean, I sometimes think that there must be a water slide between our 4th floor and the 2nd floor, that they're up there so much, and they go back to your office, and later in the day they're back up talking with us. The back and forth engagement where there are issues is quite significant that we do. So there's also the
sometimes they love me and sometimes they hate me.
Yeah, there's always a little bit of trepidation, but you know, it's a flip a coin. Is this going to work out? You know, but at the end of the day, everybody is well served by the communication, and we're often able to resolve problems at the staff to staff. Now, it's interesting the way our table is set up. That we have our 4 district directors on one side. We have Stephen, the moderator, and I guess referee in the middle, and then headquarters. So if I were sitting on the other end of this table where Tim is, I would be saying, those headquarters people, why do they keep getting in the way of our projects and stopping us from doing what we need to do? And at headquarters, like, why don't those district people do what they need to do to get the projects delivered? So we really do, you know, it's not just a pass-through. We grill the district and project teams, and we reject things, we send them back. But through Jim's project oversight, he is trying to catch these problems, and the districts are trying to catch these problems before they get to the point of requiring a commission action. We really are trying to resolve the problems, and that's why you only see that 3%, because we are resolving the problems.
And your chauffeur-in-chief sits in the middle of all of that.
Yes. Yeah, and we use it. Do you really want to go and talk to Stephen, or are we going to work out a solution to this? And I don't think
Are you feeling the love,
Steve? Either. So in terms of our, you know, as you're seeing, we've got more coming up that we're doing on this side of it on the shop. We realize this is where the magnifying glass is on us in terms of the dollars. But in terms of the public perception, a lot of this is invisible to them. But what won't be invisible is the Sb1 competitive programs. Their partner agencies are partners with us on applying for these projects, and this is going to be very, very public. These are big projects that are going to be coming forward, and I know that the commissioners and the legislature, they want to be sure that these new projects that are going to be implemented are implemented rapidly and effectively and efficiently with the accountability for not only the dollars spent, but also then the performance that we said we were going to get, as Susan mentioned earlier. We made promises at the time of programming. Did you actually deliver what you said? So we had a lot of experience with Proposition 1B. As Stephen mentioned, it's a one-time pot of money that didn't get adjusted. If your project ran into trouble, you better go find a place to find the money. And we're going to be treating this somewhat similarly, though there's a bit more flexibility because the money continues and is not a one-time. But that said, we still have to keep our word and deliver what we said. So the Commission has established a set of guidelines, and I believe there's only one more set of guidelines, the accountability guidelines, that still have to be approved. All others have been adopted, and those will presumably be approved at the March meeting. So our staff has been going through the department with much appreciation to District 3 and Amarjeet for letting us borrow somebody from their staff to help us walk through this. We've been going through all of the guidelines as they've been approved to identify every line in there where there's some action or responsibility that belongs to Caltrans from what's stated in the guidelines. And these are in addition to what SB1 articulates. So of the programs, we have 72 instances thus far where Caltrans has a specific responsibility for oversight, for delivery, for accountability, for reporting, for certifying, for approving some piece of the project that's coming forward or a program of projects. And we're developing a list, and within that we have all of our, and I realize you don't have the list, and you will receive this when we actually finish going through this, so the Commission will know where our responsibility lies, because we want to make sure that what we think we're supposed to do is the same thing you think we're supposed to do, to be sure we're on the same page. So we have all our functional areas in our districts listed and all the different requirements, all 4 pages of these. to make sure we identify who's responsible for this piece and what's the structure to report back to make sure it gets to the right person at the commission. So all the way down to the district level and the project team that's providing oversight over a project that's being delivered by a local agency, that local agency knows that it's this function within that district and that it flows through headquarters to flow back to you, to whoever it is on your staff. So we're setting that process up with the idea that this is all going to be in place before the SB1 dollars really start flowing through the competitive awards.
So let me make a very careful, nuanced point. Bruce just showed you 3 pages of a small print spreadsheet of our reporting requirements according to SB1 and CTC guidelines. I am all for accountability and transparency, but that's work. And it's not work going to projects going out to the street. I'm all for transparency and accountability, but he has 3 spreadsheets of small print requirements that we have to cover. And we're going to do that, but it's effort and it's work that's not going towards project delivery.
Yes, and Commissioners, when we developed those guidelines for your adoption for the shop, we recommended that the Commission adopt those guidelines as interim guidelines for the shop to implement the provisions of Senate Bill 1. We are working together with Caltrans as Caltrans is implementing the provisions and the requirements in Senate Bill 1, and we're looking for areas of efficiency that we might be able to build in to the process that we have laid out. At that point in time, the legislation passed in April. We needed to have guidelines out. We built upon existing processes, and we were in communication with Caltrans to make sure we weren't creating a tremendous amount of bureaucracy in any way, and that is not the intent, I know, of this commission. And so we're looking forward to hearing from Caltrans on areas that we might use to streamline. But at the same time, as commission staff, we need to ensure that we're carrying out the responsibilities that are identified in the statute for both the commission and Caltrans, and creating that transparency and accountability that is required of all of us. So they are called interim guidelines at this point.
And for the competitive programs, the commission staff has worked very hard to try to get consistency between the sets of guidelines for each of the programs. So, for example, the congested corridors program is very similar to what the freight program is in terms of requiring. So we'll have a lot of parallel processes, and some of the same people will just be dealing with different programs. One of the things we want to avoid, and we had experiences with Proposition 1B with this, and if I could, I'll just use one example of the Port of Los Angeles, where they had multiple projects that were approved, large, important freight centers everyone here knows, but they were different kinds of projects, so they touched different parts of Caltrans. They dealt with our rail division, they dealt with project delivery, they dealt with local assistance, they dealt with planning that had some oversight role. But each one of those functions had different processes and rules. So the one entity, the port, doing the same thing, had different kinds of things it had to do. So we're trying to streamline that so that we have the same thing, and the commission staff's guidelines are being set up so that we can get a lot of that consistency. So again, we will be, when we have all of this worked out, we will also be then meeting with the districts and the delivery parts of headquarters to make sure we all understand what we're doing, so that this will flow smoothly. And we'll check in. Again, we've got Proposition 1B behind us, so we know some of this. But our intent is to be successful at this starting on day 1 and not have to do something dramatic halfway into the program. And I believe our first quarterly report on our success of Proposition 1B will be due to the Commission in October. So we have to have a lot of this set up and functioning in time to be able to do that. And with
All right,
that,
I think
would pass it back to
maybe Janice will give you the microphone there. We'll talk about estimating, and we all know you have a big challenge.
Yes, so thank you. So today, I just want to try and explain the nuances between how Caltrans estimates the cost of projects and then how we're trying to get in alignment with how the contractors and how they're going to charge us to build this project. So, the purpose of our cost estimating is to establish the budget. It's to come to you guys, tell you guys what we think it's going to cost for the capital construction for that project. And the way we do it is we try to predict how much a contractor is going to charge us for building that project. Going back to the risk management chart of, the 80-20 and then the 20-80, we do an initial estimation at the very beginning, but there are a lot of the unknown unknowns, and there's some known unknowns. So we're trying to incorporate that into our cost estimating. The competitive market, the contractors, everything, all of that is going to drive the cost of a project. So we're just trying to predict how that's going to affect what it's going to cost us to do that project. So some of the differences on how we do estimating and how the contractors come in with their bids. We use historical-based information on trying to estimate the cost of the project. Through our design process, we identify what are the bid items for that project. We try to identify the quantities of that, the materials, how long it's going to take, and so forth. And then we try to establish a unit cost for each one of those quantities. And we have a database that's got all the past historical bid information in there. We can query that database, and we utilize that information to try and estimate what's the unit cost of those particular items. It's all based on the past history. So we take that information and we try to predict it to today's cost. So it's not predicting it to tomorrow's cost. We're just trying to get past bids up to today's cost. That's what the cost estimator is trying to focus on. We utilize that data. We can query it by the type of project. We can query it by the size of the project. You have large quantities. The cost could be relevant to the size of quantities, the size of the project, by geographic location, and so forth. So we take a look at that information, try and do our best job of estimating what that's going to be, and then take it to today's cost. Most other state DOTs also do it this way. We reach out with other state DOTs, find out those best practices, and that's where most other state DOTs are doing it as well. So the difference is when the contractor's doing their bids, they're actually looking at what they have available to them. They're looking at their crews, they're looking at their equipment, they look at what materials they have access to. Do they have it, do they do all the work in-house, or how much work is going to be from their subcontractors and so forth. So they develop theirs based on what their real costs, what their real people on board and everything. So they're basing it on what it's going to cost them to build this project. And so that's the little bit of that nuance is we're basing it based on the past history. We don't query our database by contractor, we query it by the type of project and so forth. And so we're trying to guess what type of contractors are going to bid on this project as well, and trying to incorporate that into our estimates. Just a little bit of data to show or to demonstrate the differences is we looked at the last 3 years of bids, and just looking at just the bids coming in for those projects, there is a range of 15% on the lowest 3 bidders. So if you look at, I'm not comparing it to our engineer's estimate, I'm just looking at how contractors the variation in the contractors. And there's a variation there, and we're trying to hit that mark somewhere in there. That's our goal. If you look at all bidders, which is more than 3, it actually spreads up to like 30-40% difference. So we're just trying to get it on those lowest bidders. So what we've been doing and what we've done in the past in terms of trying to improve upon these is this continual practice improvements. We have cost estimating forums with all the districts. We have a quarterly conversation with them. They all call in. We talk about best practices. We try to talk about trends and what's out there and so forth. We are trying out the independent cost estimator. One of the ones we're doing it with is with the CMGC projects. We have that in place. Also for structures and bridge projects, they're trying out the independent cost estimator, seeing if we can gain some best practices from that. How can we do a better job of trying to get closer to that contractor's cost on predicting what the project's going to cost us. We're also in efforts right now to identify what are some initiatives we can do better today. Some of the things is we do recognize that maybe there's a better way to do it in terms of establishing designated cost estimators in each of the districts. Most of the districts have that in place. They have, the same people doing it. But let's further expand that across all the districts. Also, is there an opportunity to provide information or knowledge about how the market's going to trend? Looking at that forecasting ahead of the time, not just trying to get it to today's cost, but also looking at tomorrow's cost as well. Trying to incorporate some of that market expertise and economics part of estimating as well. And then again, continuing looking at opportunities to make improvements. Those top items, the high cost items on projects, maybe we'll continue looking at maybe there's a better method of estimating those, not based on past bids, but maybe there's other statistical analysis or information we can bring in to try and, again, better predict what those costs are going to be. So that's where we're going right now. And just going back to that cost database, I do want to recognize District 8, and John's here today, but really District 8 did us a big favor and started collecting this information and putting it into a cost database. And now, over the last 10 years, all the districts are using this database, and we're maintaining it that way. So we are developing tools and trying to improve our processes and procedures to, again, get closer to that contractor's cost and what they're going to charge us to build this project.
And I'm encouraging the department to hire some economists, because engineers are great at looking numbers back. They're not very good at looking to the future, but economists look into the future.
Paul? When you do hire that economist, I guess there's no water, but a 2-inch pipe, no matter what you do, you can only pass so much water through it. Theoretically, there is a capacity of contractors, labor, and aggregate in this state. No matter what we do, you can't move over capacity. If we were to try to put too many projects on the street at one time, we in theory are making a bad choice. At some point, it would be great if someone could strategically step back and say, this is the capacity that we should strive for. If we go over this capacity, we would be better off waiting a year for this project to go to the street. And keeping in mind that we've now pushed all this money to local streets and roads, so every local agency is doing the same thing. Granted, usually they are a different type of contractor and different type of labor, but they're all buying from the same aggregate. They're probably the same, they're drawing from the same unions. So, does that make sense, or is it?
Commissioner, you are forecasting the next couple of slides.
Yes.
Well, I guess I should have read ahead.
No, it's the logical question, and that's what the next presentation is about, because you're absolutely right.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, proceed.
Okay, there we go.
Mike Keever, Engineering Services. I mentioned I have bridge design and bridge construction. I also have office engineers, so we have access to data. And Commissioner, you're absolutely dead on. That's one of our big concerns, is with all the money that comes from SB1, both for us and for the locals, and the measure money that's gone out there, and then they're talking about maybe some federal money coming in. How do we put all this money to work? We want to optimize the funds that we have to put as much as we can into the assets themselves. And so, as Janice mentioned, it's the competitive marketplace that determines our actual cost. So we do our best to predict it with our cost estimate, but we want competition. And so if you look at that chart on the right, that's 14 years or so of data that compares the number of bidders to Caltrans' estimate of what it's going to cost. And there's a pretty strong correlation between the number of bidders and how that affects the actual bids that we receive. On the left, you see a chart that shows, going back to 2007, so for the past 10 years, how many bidders we've had. You'll notice it spikes up to 8 in 2009, when the economy was in a very different place than it is now. So we were getting a lot of bidders. My next slide will show you what the impacts of that actually are. So for us, we want to grow the industry. We want to entice contractors to bid on their work. And so we've been taking steps to talk to industry to say, okay, we all see this coming. What can we do to work together in order to try to be successful? And so there have been a number of steps that we've taken with others. One, we've had these Sb1 forums. All the district directors on my right, your left, have had forums. I know some of you have participated in those forums to talk to local agencies, material suppliers, contractors, about what we can do together in order to deliver this tremendous transportation program in California. We're meeting monthly with the construction industry to talk about a number of issues going forward. And at the request of the contractors, they've asked us, we have a look-ahead report that looks at our projects coming out. They've asked us to expand that, to add more information on the materials, on some of the, the concrete, the rebar, the asphalt, those big fundamental costly materials, to give them an idea of what, not only the type of work, where is it located, but how much material is going to be needed. And in talking to them, they said that's going to help them guide their investment, the equipment they're going to be buying, bringing in additional crews. Some of these are national, international firms, and so they can adjust to this marketplace. To the extent that we can help them anticipate, they will then adjust. And they're saying, we're pretty nimble industry, construction, and we're pretty clever, we're pretty innovative. Let us know what's going on and give us a chance to adapt. And that's what we're trying to do, is give them this information. We're working with local agencies to try to look at what can we do to develop an aggregate is certainly one of the issues. And so what can we do to expand our aggregate? We're looking at working with the Department of Conservation to try to get an inventory. Where are we with regard to our current aggregate sources going ahead? With the expanding program, there are additional requirements with our DVBEs, so our disadvantaged businesses. So our Office of Business and Economic Opportunities, OBEO, is working to try to expand. They're doing additional forums and workshops in order to expand the DBEs, DVBEs, and SBEs that are out there, but the contractors are coming back to us and saying it's difficult to find enough to meet the goals. They have an opportunity to explain they made a good faith effort, but that's part of the process as far as we want to grow the industry overall. And then trucking is another area that there's a pinch point.
What can I say?
So we're looking at how can we, the things we can do with regard to our work windows, so we don't cause a spike in trucking, because our work window is so short, you need a whole lot of trucks all in a short period, a short window. So if we can maybe work with industry to give them a little more latitude, maybe that won't pinch the trucking industry so much, so that they have a chance to adapt.
Hey, Mike,
related to this,
Mike, before you go to that next slide, let me add on to that, because, this is a very important point. If you look at the last 3 years on the left, we've been averaging just about 5 bidders. Now, that's a pretty healthy spot to be. We get competition, and it also reflects that industry is reasonably busy. It's not a good sign when we're getting an average of 8 bidders. That was a period of time when we would see 12 to 15 bidders on a project. It was great for us, but it's not good for industry. But those last 3 years have been a very good ride, because we get competition, but it also shows that the industry is about healthy. So we're watching that very closely, and that's been a nice little sweet spot. We're already seeing the number of bidders tick down just a little bit, and the closing of that gap between the engineer's estimate and the low bidder. So I'm worried about when we put the projects, when we start adding the SB1 workload. Now, Commissioner Van Konynenberg brought up a very good point when we start to flood the market. The only challenge we have is this is an ongoing program. So we need to help get industry ramped up, address some of these pinch points that we may see, because we're anticipating this is going to be an ongoing program. So that industry needs to, we need to expand that industry, both on the large contractors and the small contractors and disadvantaged contractors, so they're there for the long haul. But we absolutely, we look very carefully, it's hard when the program gets this big. We look very carefully at the weeks that we put out bids, how many big projects we put out at any given time. We don't want two $75 to $100 million projects being bid on and bids opened on the same day. We want the contractors to have the time to put in and give us their best effort. We spread those bids out. We're going to have less and less of an opportunity to do that when we're putting out this quantity of work. But I mean, that's the level of depth that we're doing. I talk to the construction industry every other month with their leadership and talk about these types of issues. And that labor, materials, trucking have all come up.
And commissioners, under the supplementals that you took action on today and yesterday, the key thing was that most of those supplementals only had 2 bidders, even though there were 5 to 8 bid packages taken out. Some of them that more than the 2 bidders were disqualified because they were non-responsive. So in the end, you had 2 bidders per all of those projects, and the costs were higher.
I'm sorry. This is a discussion for another day, but study after study is that these are high-paying jobs, good middle skills jobs. We're tending to grow low-paying jobs in a lot of our regions instead of these middle skills, and so another opportunity to partner with local communities to help with that education platform. I mean, that's a mid-range, obviously long-range play, but it's a big issue.
I would suggest that's a perfect issue to capture and talk about at a future conversation at this level.
Happy to do it. We've done a lot of research in that as well, and just did a middle skills report in Southern California, sponsored by Chase, looking for those people to fill jobs, and this is the industry. So anyway, another topic.
So maybe related to that, hopefully with SB1 being sustained instead of a boom and bust industry, we'll have something that can be sustained, and the programs and education will adapt to that.
Yeah,
so related to what I was talking about, I'm sorry.
I was just going to echo the workforce issues. I think those are huge for us to get alignment and get that base built up. But I do think the cloud of the repeal, until we get that behind us, it's going to be a little bit of a barrier from some guy or gal starting a new business necessarily. So I think we all have to work hard to make sure that goes away.
Recall that there's money in SB1 for workforce development as well, so there are resources to tap into.
Well, plus the governor's, press for education and the higher education, to kind of retool a little bit too. So there's lots of opportunities, I think.
So the slide that you're looking at here is a relationship of our construction costs versus time. And so you may recall the things spiked in 2006, and then we had the Great Recession, and things have recovered since then. If you look at this, you could also look at it. We didn't put anything on the axes. You could look at this. This could be a stock market index too, right? I mean, it gets very difficult to predict, and this is part of the point that I wanted to make, is that we know the information that we have going back to the past. That's part of what Janice was talking about. But certainly we didn't, nor do I think we could have predicted the sudden turnaround that we were going to see in 2006. So we do our best to adjust our past. But going up to 2006, we were saying, hey, this curve is getting steeper and steeper. We are trying to adjust our costs and putting them higher and higher. And as Stephen was saying, when things flip around, we tend to be on one side of the equation versus the other. Thank you. I'll let her know.
Tell them to move that microphone.
Hey, Mom. So on this chart, if you look at it, so we were talking about the number of bidders. Interestingly, this correlation, in 2005, we got down on average to 3.6 bidders. And so that's also when you see our costs spiking up. 2006 wasn't much better, it's 3.9 bidders. And then it turns around in 2009, that's when we had the 8 bidders. And so you see that reflected in our most recent history. And so going forward right now, we're carrying a cost escalation of 4.2%. Is that the right number? That's the difficult thing to know right now, right? As far as we escalate to the midpoint of construction, but what's going to happen between now, the projects we're programming now, and 2-3 years from now, when we're out there with our contracts, and what are the contractors going to give us as far as their bids? And that's one of the challenges ahead for all of us, is trying to program the right amount so that we can put the money and utilize it and get, as Malcolm was saying earlier, get as many projects out as we can. We want to move and put the money to work according to the will of the people and the intent of the bill.
What kind of a contingency do you all put in? Do you have facts, figures? I mean, because we talk about G12 giving you, what, 20%, at least on the construction phase. So what do you do with the contingency? Because you have, in addition to that, you have some contingency, I assume, in every project, right?
So I think I'm going to let Stephen answer, but I'm going to flip to the second to last slide. And it's something that Stephen and I have been working on to talk about cost estimates and break it into buckets and to talk about that. And Stephen, you want to take a shot at that?
Normally the department uses a standard contingency of 5%, and I keep on harping on the department that standard 5% is good for the standard project, but you should be examining it by project. You should be examining the risks of the projects, and some projects deserve a bigger contingency than 5% because of the risks, the unknowns that are still out there.
So this slide 15, one of the things that we've been looking at is really trying to break our estimates down a little bit more and understand what's the processes that we work in each one of these areas. And the idea, and it came to me, I was fortunate to go to a worldwide congress on project management, and they had a slide very similar to this that they've doctored up for Caltronized for what we do. So we're breaking these estimates into what I call subcomponents, and it's generating a lot of questions. And Steve and I have been having lots of dialogue about this. But at the base estimate at the bottom, or the pink version up there, we're trying to define our most realistic or most likely base estimate. And this is from a support perspective as well as from a capital construction perspective. And the question is, well, how do you do that in a large organization consistently? The second question is, well, how do we quantify risk? How much, and you asked that question, how much do we account for in contingency? And what makes sense? And the third is escalation. What's the right escalation amount? So we're decomposing it. I don't have the answers, but it's what one of the things that I committed to you was, yeah, I wouldn't be in this business. One of the things I committed to you was improve cost estimating. I'm hoping you're starting to see some of the fruits of our labors, but this slide is one of those where we're starting to look at, okay, it's just not cost estimating. What are the components of the cost estimate? Let's go in and do a deep dive on these things. And figure out, well, what is the right thing? And so it's just a start in helping us to ask the right questions. And then the last slide is really our closing, and really coming back to the final comments. And,
don't forget this.
Director Doherty, I don't know if you...
We need to repeat this.
Oh, okay. I was asked to repeat a slide, and it's this one. The 80-20 slide, from a risk perspective, that at the PID, 20% is known and 80% is not known. And as we go through the process, those unknowns become knowns. And we go to construction, it flips to 80% known and 20% unknown. And those are risks, and those are risks that we have to manage. And we have a formal process that goes through and manages those risks. And with that, I always found it wise to defer to my director on closing remarks.
Well, I mean, what I will say is I think we've covered almost all of these things throughout the conversation, and I think it's been a great conversation, and I think it can, and we can continue to do this in some form or fashion and zero in on other aspects, some of those that we touched on today. But the magnitude of the program, the accountability, we wanted to make sure that we shared what we had. At the very end, we got down to risks, and it's about reasonable risk and the appropriate level of risk, as opposed to zero risk. I just want to, whatever time we have left, we can delve into other questions on this, but maybe also tee up some subjects that we want to dive into in future conversations like this. But I appreciate the conversation. This is, I think, exactly what I would have hoped we would have gotten out of it.
I just want to take this end of the table here. I really appreciate having our district folks and the folks that are in closest to the trenches on a daily basis, so to speak. So anything else you all would want to add or wish for or have us lean on that we could do? So
and tell the other 6 that they missed a great time.
Yeah, we'll certainly let them know. So I think what I would just want to, my final statement, I guess, is it's exciting. Jim led off with this, that we're moving into a new era. And I think that we have this tag on us that we are risk averse. And we're risk averse for a variety of reasons. And I think we're making the effort to address that issue head on with some of the initiatives that are presented to you today, and taking on the element of risk, identify what those risks are, and put a price tag to them. So I would just want to leave with that particular comment.
And Commissioners, I certainly hope that you found this to be productive, educational, and that you'd want us to continue with these workshops in the future and take deeper dives into certain subjects.
Madam Chair, we have, were you going to say something over here?
I just want to give the rest of these folks, it doesn't matter, you can go first.
Malcolm asked about future topics, and some of them already came up this morning with the aggregate discussion, workforce, these environmental costs. I would still like to understand more, and I saw the other page with the bar charts, but I still have some more questions. Maybe I'll start with you, Stephen, later on, not today. And then I know in the last couple of days you mentioned, innovation, autonomy, high tech. So, I mean, there's a lot of, and I know project delivery is separate from that, but there's, I mean, easily 5 discussions, that we could do in the next, few months.
I agree. Back to Bijan.
We certainly do appreciate the continuous offer of the Commission assisting in various elements of the delivery when we reach those points where maybe the Commission could assist in discussion with either resource agencies or some locals. We've utilized that in the past successfully. Most recently, Commissioner Gelmedi and Commissioner Alvarado helped out in a discussion with the local agency in getting the project back on track. So we're going to be reaching out to you as those things come up. John talked about risk and larger projects, even the smaller ones, we do actually have, the project managers actually have a risk register of the projects, and they identify the risk and they put a price tag on it. We certainly do not program the price of those, but we watch them, we manage them, we try to make sure that they don't play out against us, but they are there. And so we're doing that. And the other comment that was made on the contingency, we do have the standard contingency that we use, which is typically 5%. We don't need to have a discussion to ask for that. But on certain projects, and they're becoming more and more, when we see things that are reasonable to ask for more, we can go up to 10%, but we have to sign off on those. So it is not an automatic, but we do ask for additional contingency for projects that do qualify or call for that. but I want to appreciate the conversation, looking forward to the future workshops.
Okay, well, I don't know whose idea this was, but it was a good idea. I think it's been really good conversation.
I'll take credit for it.
Okay. Good job, Stephen. I think that we do a lot at Caltrans, and we're, as you noted, Commissioner Dunn, we do a terrible job of telling people what we're doing and talking about our successes. So I do appreciate the offer of help, and certainly,
Third-party validators to
yes.
share the story, even more powerful
Yes.
than you telling your own.
Yeah. And so that's probably a conversation I'd like to continue. But I just think, pulling the curtain back a little bit so that you folks who are responsible for oversight have a sense of what we're actually doing has been really well worth our time. I hope worth your time. And I look forward, moving ahead. We've got a huge program to deliver, and it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that the program is successful and we're delivering what the public expects. So I appreciate the time here.
Thanks, Commissioner. I also really appreciate this opportunity because all too often you see us on those 3% of the projects, and that's the time you get to know us. And so I really appreciate Commissioner Dunn always reminding us. Remind us before you ask that we didn't see the other 97%. And so this, just having that open dialogue, showing some of the processes that we are together starting to tackle, and risk has been a big theme. And if we are taking appropriate risk, you will see us. Because if we're taking appropriate risk, some of them are going to come true or not come true, depending on which way you're looking at it. And so we will be back. And, I've mentioned it to Malcolm. I was making 100% delivery for a long time. I got more recognition by failing on one because I told them a year and a half ahead of time that I might. And that got more recognition of but you still ended the job earlier by not moving it out. And so having that kind of shared understanding of what we're doing, it goes to your exec director talking about that accountability and the transparency, doing things in the public light. And so having these opportunities to have the discussion, I think helps all of us, helps everyone watching, everyone in the audience here or at home. And so it's really good to have the conversation. So thanks, Stephen, for having the idea. But it gets us here, and we can give examples in each of your areas of what we tried that didn't work or what we tried that worked and how we do that. So as much as you want from us, we can continue this. I think it's a great forum.
Well, I think for all of us, we're all wearing the same jerseys in the public's light. We succeed together, and I think it is important. I mean, risk is a 4-letter word, and like you say, if you never have crossed over the line, you're probably not trying hard enough, and you're leaving extra stuff on the table. It's the way I ski, too. If I don't fall down, I'm not I'm not trying. So with that, any other closing thoughts, comments? I want to thank our staff and your staff. You want to wrap it up? I know you're the author of this, Stephen. You own it.
What I would want to say is I do expect to see the 3% to 2% of supplementals coming to you. If I don't see that, then I would start suspecting that the budgets are being just set too high. So this number is a healthy number.
And also, is it consistent with what other states?
I don't know about other states, but it's been consistent throughout the years for the department.
Okay, and to keep us all in order, is there any public comment? Anyone from the public wishing to speak? Seeing no one approach the podium, I'm going to say we're good to go. So thank you.